I'm Vladimir Rouvinski, Director of CS, Center for Interdisciplinary Research at the University of Icesi, and it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Benjamin Creutzfeldt, my good friend of mine and specialist in studying of China and Latin America, who is visiting us on the occasion of China Week here at the University of Icesi. First question I would like to ask you, Benjamin, is about your interest to study China and Latin America. How it started?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm German and British by origin, so in fact I came to China and to Colombia in a very circuitous route, and really became at one point fed up with learning Latin, which I did for many years, and decided to study Chinese as a language that is relatively simple. And I went to China when I was 19, and that basically changed my perspective on the world, and I have since then, for the last 20-25 years, been dedicated to helping a sort of dialogue between China and the West in a very general sense. And about 6 years ago I came to Colombia, and so I've specialized more in what is China and Latin America, because there is a huge gap of understanding between the two.
It seems like we are witnessing in recent years sort of an explosion of interest to study China and Latin America. But how would you characterize the state of the discipline if we are talking about how much really do we know about China and Latin America, and what we know in particular in Latin America about China and Latin America?
Yes, that's it's true. Of course, China, because of its economic growth, has grown enormously in importance. There's no question that it impacts all our lives, including in Latin America. But that has come suddenly, sort of out of the blue almost, and there is not the knowledge to back it up. There are practically no China experts in Latin America. There are a few sinologists here and there, a couple in Argentina. Mexico has a good center. And there are, efforts like your school and some also in other parts of the country that try to catch up in a way, and it's always catching up. There is more work done in the United States on Chinese-Latin American relations than there is in Latin America itself. So there's a big disconnect and a gap and a lot to catch up.
What about specifically Colombia? You are now introducing your book, China and Latin America, which was published in Bogota.
That's a great.
I think it is an important contribution to the field here in Colombia. But if we are talking about the interest the government of Colombia has to advance their relations with China, do we have enough backup for that interest in order to contribute into the design of public policy here, if we're talking about China in Colombia, or Colombian relations with China, or knowledge we have about China in Colombia?
Well, clearly there isn't enough knowledge. I mean, there are not enough Colombians that speak Chinese, just to start. And again, it's these very disparate efforts that are every university, Bogota, Cali, Barranquilla, Medellin, have their own approach, have their own attempts to teach about China, even publish things on China. And the same happens between different ministries, is my observation, that there is a very clear lack of knowledge, and therefore the approach is not coordinated. There are occasionally attempts for two ministries to go together, but there is, as one knows, in Colombia, to some extent, a lot of over-regulation when it comes to import-export, and yet there is a sort of lack of coordination when it comes to a specific market, one so important market and source of investment, etc., as it is China. So I think that's what worries me, is that there is still a very blinkered view, like the horses in the street, that there are very good efforts. Some are, and I consider, and I'm advertising my book because it's one of the first published in Spanish on this question, and it has voices from China, from Mexico, from Spain, from the United States, and from Colombia. And so that's what's important, I think, is to share more knowledge, critically share knowledge, to exchange efforts like, I'm here now visiting and you visit Bogota. And so there are hopefully, it's only that way that there can be any way forward, because otherwise it's just going to be Chinese initiative. At the moment it's almost all Chinese initiative and some individual business efforts. For example, we know that there are growth figures of import and export, China, Colombia, but it's almost all, if you analyze it, most of it is Chinese demand or Chinese effort to sell their cars here. It's not a concerted plan from Colombia. In places like Chile, Peru, Brazil, you find a different approach. There's a more informed approach, a more planned approach, and that's something that's missing here.
Thank you very much for sharing this view, and I would like to congratulate you on publishing this book, because I think it's very important that we have this volume on China and Latin America. And I know also, and I'm a member of your network, that you send in updates, you send in information concerned with the developments between China and Latin America. And there are so many students, I know personally at this university, and I'm sure that this is the situation which is common for many other universities, who would like to study China, who would like to have business with China. What would you recommend to them? Where they have to start, or better to say, what they have to be careful about, or what they have to pay particular attention to? I want to do something with China, so what would you recommend to me to do?
Well, students nowadays are more and more mobile, so I think it's not too much to ask and to suggest that, if you're young enough, at 19, I left, after leaving school, I went to China for 6 months. It's not so much, but I studied Chinese, and that gave me the grounding. And then you can decide if you like it or not. And that's, something that I would recommend to many. There are now, just a few days ago, the founder of Blackstone Group announced a $300 million grant for students from all over the American continent, including Latin America, to go to China for a master's degree. There are more and more opportunities to engage with China, to understand it. And I think that's really the most practical. It's not a scientific approach. It's not what do I get out of it immediately. It's getting to know that reality and understanding it and appreciating it, and then it goes both ways.
Well, thank you very much for this interview, and I'm looking forward to being able to welcome you once again at Icesi. And good luck with all what you are doing.
I hope there will be many more such works. This is just the beginning.
Thank you very much.